Hi, this is John Rowell for the Rowell Report. Today is Friday, October 10th, 2025. I hope you're having a wonderful day. I wanted to take a moment to analyze the fall of Western institutions. We have the ICC, the International Criminal Court, which pursued a case against President Vladimir Putin of Russia for a supposed kidnapping of 20,000 Ukrainian children. And this was based on a report produced by a Yale watchdog um, organization within Yale University. And this organization did a study which was paid for by the U.S. State Department with maps provided by the Department of Defense showing camps where children were going, supposedly where they were being kidnapped to. These camps were all like summer camps where kids would go for a week or two. The purpose of these camps was to get the kids away from the front lines where they were being shelled by the Ukrainians. Yes, the Ukrainians were shelling civilian areas and killing civilians, so this was traumatizing the children. They decided that they would try to get some of these children to safer locations. Sometimes that meant that they would go with a grandparent that was in Russia, but the majority of the children which were in question were simply going to summer camps while they were shoring up their defenses and making the civilian areas more habitable and less dangerous. So anyway, they did this phony study in the United States about the so-called 20,000 kidnapped children and then presented that as if it was occurring, but the person who did the study never visited Russia or the camps. There was never any on-the-ground investigation. An individual later did an on-the-ground investigation and found that this whole report was based on phony, flawed evidence. So anyway, the International Criminal Court decided to take this phony, flawed evidence and use that to create a case against President Vladimir Putin and issued an arrest warrant. And that is still in play till today, despite this information being debunked and shown to be flawed. So the International Criminal Court simply self-deleted and eliminated itself from any consideration as a viable institution. The other big institution, which obviously is flawed and useless, is none other than our beloved United Nations, which is controlled by Western money and by Western interests. They were not capable of providing any sort of political effort to stop the massacre of civilians in Gaza, and it always has been an organization which has primarily defended and protected Western interests. So initially the United Nations was a collection of countries which would gather to try to fix the problems of the world through dialogue and through institutions which were created by the United Nations. These institutions created by the United Nations were picked apart and taken over by Western interest and Western leaders to assign their own leadership, and countries like Russia, China, and other countries are trying to reform the United Nations. I think that sometimes it's better to try to fix what's broken rather than try to come up with a new institution, but there are new institutions being created all the time, like the Shanghai Cooperation Organization and other organizations which bring together countries where they truly dialogue and try to fix problems and make agreements for the benefit of everyone, not for the benefit of a few countries. So the United Nations has long shown itself to be useless and simply a tool of wealthy Western nations like the United States and the UK. And so that's another institution that has fallen by the wayside, and the effort to try to restore the United Nations to its original luster and to bring it back as a viable institution to address problems in this world requires quite a bit of reform, and it's hard to know whether it's actually repairable or not, or whether many of these growing economies in the world, like China and Russia, will simply come up with another organization and dump the United Nations and its useless formats, which don't resolve anything. So, with that said, we can turn now to the Nobel Peace Prize Committee and this whole organization of assigning Nobel Peace Prizes. That organization is simply been hijacked by Western interest, and I think it's been called a sham, or simply a. Others have called it prejudicial towards certain powers and interests. But anyway, the most recent winner of the Nobel Peace Prize is none other than a U.S. puppet who was a employee of the United States, a U.S. NGO, which U.S. NGOs are just basically nice-looking organizations that carry out the directives of the U.S. government, of the Pentagon, of the CIA, whoever's calling the shots in the deep state. So she was a member and running this organization in the time of George Bush. Then we find that in 2014 she tried to carry out a coup d'etat of a democratically elected government. She carried out a so-called resistance movement in Venezuela, which was trying to carry out social upheaval and to overthrow the government. So several ways of trying to bring up about a coup d'état, and then to take all these resources from Venezuela and farm them out to U.S. or Western companies that would pay dearly for access to these resources, and the kickbacks would go into somebody's wallet. So anyway, this person, Maria Karina Machado, who was chosen for the Nobel Peace Prize Award, simply a U.S. puppet, and this individual supposedly was working for democratic change in Venezuela, and really she was just another operative within a larger U.S. regime change operation, and just carrying out her role. She went to the same Yale institution that produced Navalny, who was the Russian corrupt oligarch, who decided that he wanted to challenge Vladimir Putin for the presidency in Russia, and then found himself in a jail in Siberia, I believe, and then at some point he died. So anyway, all these different individuals being put out by Yale. Again, Yale, we remember that name from that phony report which was used to create the arrest warrant for President Vladimir Putin, and Yale again involved in preparing regime change operatives. So anyway, this is a sorry sight for all these Western institutions, which supposedly are solid and telling us who are the real heroes on our planet, and really all they're doing is giving an applause and a pat on the back for U.S. operatives and for those who are involved in carrying out anti-democratic or violent action on this planet, something like President Obama, who was never worthy of the Nobel Peace Prize. You can remember that he was carrying out airstrikes on on weddings and funeral processions, and then they said, "Oh, we thought there was a Taliban member at that funeral procession," and after they kill 30, 40 people, including women and children, they said, "Oops, our bad." And of course, since the target was a dangerous terrorist, then everything's okay. You're a hero for peace and for progress and for the humanity, even though this person was really a murderer with a title of president. So anyway, these institutions have long past their usefulness. They continue to give a star on the forehead for all these individuals who are carrying out some form of U.S. foreign policy. And what we needed after World War II were stable institutions which would cut through all the narratives and all the fluff and all the bribery in order to create stable, objective institutions which could regulate countries in the West. And apparently these institutions have now rotted to the core, and they are just like big trees with rotten trunks, and of course this means that we're basically a ship without a rudder in a violent storm on the sea. And so everyone needs to go out and investigate on their own, make their own opinions. Don't listen to me, don't listen to others, but at least go out, read, do your own research, and you'll find that our Western institutions, which should be there to protect us, are no longer doing so, and we are going down the path of so many other countries and institutions and empires. We think about the Roman Empire, which was supposed to be the Senate and the Roman people, and as soon as Julius Caesar came, he became the emperor, and he was of course assassinated because the Senate was suspicious of his growing power. But then after him came others who restored the power of the empire and made the Senate subservient to the emperor. And so the Senate basically became a rubber stamp for the emperor. And in our country, in the United States, the Senate and Congress are slowly becoming rubber stamps for executive action, and our Supreme Court basically is off slicing and dicing verbal expressions without taking action to try to bring the true checks and balances in the system in this country. So we can see our country slowly fading into a kind of fascism. And once a country or institution fades into once the checks and balances are gone, like in the Roman Empire, the Senate really never came back until after the emperor basically was dead, and the empire was dead, and they were basically reinstated to be in the Senate around the year 467, and lasted for another 200 years, but more as a social club, and they never were able to restore their luster, and the Senate finally became a church, so the Roman Senate. So anyway, the good news is, if after the president of the U.S. becomes kind of an emperor, and the Senate and the House become basically rubber stamps for this emperor or this fascist leader or whatever you want to call it. Um, One day down the road, long in the future, we may have a Capitol building which is just a church. So, anyway, instead of going to the Capitol building to lobby someone for a policy, you can go there and pray. Anyway, um, we're heading down a very dangerous path on this planet with all these institutions being devalued, being neutered, being, some may call, well, maybe I won't use that word, but anyway, um, we can just say that the institutions which were created after World War II are basically all washed up. Is there any left that's actually of any value? I can't think of any. So, anyway, I'll leave my report at that. Certainly, things may not be so bad in some areas, but we do have some strong voices in the world. We have um, the individual at the United Nations who was involved in the report on the declaring a genocide going on in Gaza. She's from Italy, and she has been outspoken. She expresses herself very well. Hopefully, one day she can have greater authority and she can reform many of the institutions related to the UN. But anyway, I wouldn't hold your breath. Everything seems to be going in the wrong direction right now, and we see a consolidation of power around these large media and all these surveillance companies, like the ones that are coming out in the UK. So as the Western democracies begin to fade into a kind of totalitarian governments or a form of that, these institutions continue to be devalued and just simply become social clubs. So anyway, as I mentioned, that's my report for today. I hope you have a nice weekend, and we'll be looking forward to seeing you back again on Monday. So take care. Bye bye.